All right, guys, welcome to another episode here. I'm here with Coach Pete, and we got something planned here today. We got we got some interesting content here.
Yeah, it's interesting, Andrew. You and I had planned this one out specifically to talk around grief, the loss of loved ones, possibly the loss of a relationship, whatever grief comes up for someone. And for me, just to ease the audience into it, this Halloween marked the 12-year anniversary of the loss of my brother. And I'll be honest with you that there was a little bit of anxiety coming into this conversation today. I knew that it was coming. And for a lot of the morning, I was thinking like exactly around that. How are we going to approach this? How are we going to break this open? How are we going to bring this up for the audience? And I recognized the uncomfortableness for myself. And that's exactly this topic. So if you're thinking of turning this off right now, you need to listen to this. And I was trying to plan like, okay, how am I going to approach this? What am I going to talk about? Do I need some bullet points or anything? And it's like, no, I need to be comfortable with this. Yes, it's a difficult conversation, but I need to just be able to tell my story. Treat this no different than any of our other podcasts of just allowing it to unfold. And at the same time, being very intentional of why we're having this conversation. And that's to try to normalize the conversation around grief, the connection that can come out of it, and how we are all going to experience it. Whether that's directly, whether you've experienced that indirectly, trying to support somebody, know a friend, and what to do. I think that's the main struggle, not only for men, but just for our North American society in general, of what to do, how to respond, how to support, how to deal and integrate grief into your life.
I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a conversation that I don't think I would have been comfortable having years ago, as I have lost my father at a what would be considered a younger age than most. And this isn't poor Pete, poor Andrew. Oh my gosh, they're going to talk about their losses. This is actually just accepting nature. This is accepting reality, because everyone, whether you've had it already, then you'll be able to relate right away. But everybody's going to have the loss of the loved ones. And it's difficult to accept. It's difficult to hear, but parents, siblings, lovers, all of that is a part of life. It's a part of nature. There's no stopping it. This isn't a conversation about Pete and Andrew. This is a conversation about what is going to happen to everyone listening to this. And
It's been, for me, Andrew, like I mentioned, 12 years since the loss of my brother. And I really want to take a deep dive there. Okay. And how that's formed exactly who I am today, and deeply, deeply passionate about the work that we do here with men. That's 100%. How my brother lives on with me, in me, through me, and the piece of service, the piece of power that's come out of that. You know, you say that a few years ago, you might not have been comfortable to really have this conversation. I'm right there in that same boat with you, man. And I think that in this past year, supporting my partner as she integrates grief into her life and being that support and learning, watching her journey, going through it, being there as that support, learning a lot of the tools and gaining a better understanding has given me a lot of good reflection points on my own grief, on a deeper understanding of myself. So I would say that truly, realistically, I've grown a lot more in this space just in the past year alone.
What changed? What Because this is a 12-year journey, and you're saying in this last year that you've grown significantly. Like, what played a role in that growth?
I think a huge part, Andrew, is that when I lost my brother, whose name was Andrew, actually. Yeah. Yeah. You never knew that.
You never shared that before.
I never did. And that's why I'll get to the part of coming into the program and how uncanny it was that your name was Andrew as the owner of the pro. Yeah.
That is
who I was at the time. You know, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts. I've shared this with men in the program and very honest about this. You know, I was just striking out as that young professional, very ego driven, very low self-awareness. No, you know, I would argue that I hadn't grown beyond, you know, an adolescent age in emotional awareness, emotional intelligence. So the typical patterns came through of that anger, that resentment, that guilt, that shame. Take a deep dive into how those pieces worked up over time. And in doing the work here with Project Grounded Man over the past few years, I knew a huge part in seeing a lot of the challenges, a lot of the struggles that the men were going through, a lot of the isolation that they were feeling, and being able to welcome them in, welcome them into the community, know that they've got pieces and support and belonging, making that forward progress, regardless of what stories they've had built up in the past. And the reason why I say in the last year, so that was that sense of purpose, that drive, my brother living through me turning that past trauma, that past pain, his pain, recognizing that memory is living through me and driving that purpose. The broader understanding over the past year has been literally, man, being able to be a support to somebody that's going through grief that comes with her own set of tools, her own, just a plethora of tools, knowledge, resources that she's been able to tap into that I just would not have gone out to seek. And in being able to have conversations with her, and I've got a really close friend that just recently lost his mother as well. And being able to connect and have those conversations and listening to, you know, some different resources of other people talking about their grief. You know, it's given me the space to be able to call this back up and do a deeper reflection to the point that we're having this conversation now.
There's a level of connection that you can instantly have with someone who is going through or has already gone or recently gone through a significant loss. Because it's not just the moment of loss. There's almost there are stages to this. Like before the loss, it may be a buildup of health problems that then lead to this period of significant decline in health, and you may be responsible or one of the key people responsible for that person. There's the event, and then obviously then we go into the 5 stages of grief. You can identify what stage someone is in, and I've been through some of these stages or all of them at this point, and there's an instant connection of humanity. It's like nothing else about this person, about their political views, social views, sexual views, gay, straight, religious views. None of that really plays a factor when we're talking about the loss of someone, family member, loved one, what have you, friend. You instantly have a connection. And I believe that's the connection of humanity, because it's something that we all have and are going to experience. And I have felt that numerous times over the past couple of years. And even if you don't have the answers, it's almost like a silent connection that continues to grow as you just continue to hold space for this person. And that space is communicating the understanding, the acceptance, the validation of what their world looks like right now and how you were in that world or are currently in that world as well.
That piece right there, Andrew, is one of the biggest parts that I hope the audience can take away from this, is holding that space. So like I said, I mean, I was a little uncomfortable coming into this conversation of how to tackle this. It's a difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation. And I see it and think of the social media era. And prior to that, there was not a lot of loss or grief in my life.
What do you mean how does social media play a role in this conversation?
From my perspective, I see this being a huge piece. I think that we've lost historically a lot of really deeply rooted cultural traditions and celebrations of life. But this push on social media of always being these snapshots of people's perfect lives, not seeing what's going on behind the veil, the challenges, the struggles, that everyone has to be picture perfect all the time, that you can't be seen struggling. I strongly believe that programs the subconscious mind to only talk about the good things and doesn't equip us with the tools to be able to hold that space, like you said, to truly validate or empathize, whether you've gone through it or not, but just to be able to recognize, hey, that must be really hard. I don't understand what you're going through. What do you need?
I think we can all understand where you're coming from here. What do you think is going on in the mind of a man? Like, if he isn't able to share that he's doing well, so he might hide or suppress the reality of struggle and what's going on in his life. Because what is the fear here? What's the fear that's preventing guys from revealing the truth of their lives?
Of appearing weak, of being judged, of being labeled as an emotional man. That's not what society has made being a man out to be, right? Part of what I hid behind as well, and I still catch myself trying to ensure that I don't default to this state, but is trying to pick the mood up and just recognizing, like, no, it's not a time for jokes. It's not a time to try to shed some sort of positive light on it or anything like that, depending on the person, on the connection that you have with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But to be able to, just like you said, holding that space, holding that silence, being able to be there as just that, simply that listener, not trying to give advice, not trying to soften the blow. And for most men, most people in general, that's uncomfortable.
And right there, I think that is where the power is. It's uncomfortable. Just like running 10 miles is uncomfortable. Just like lifting weights is uncomfortable. Just like taking a cold shower is uncomfortable. And nowhere near are these things on the same scale as the loss of a loved one. But what I'm saying, though, is that because it's uncomfortable to share reality, to share the truth, to be vulnerable, to share emotion, even because it's uncomfortable, that would make it power. That would make it strength. That would be, for many men, especially highly ego-driven, successful, forward-thinking men, this is likely a missing link in their toolbox of relating with other people. Vulnerability. I think we've made it clear that this conversation is applicable to every human listening right now. So, Pete, take us through your story here. If we were to go back 12 years, how does this go?
I'll walk you through that. I just want to touch on one point you just said there, and that was that this is applicable to every person. This is a human experience. I want to have this conversation geared very, very much towards men, because from my experience, from what I've seen, women have a lot of the tools. They've got a lot of those connections. They have that feminine energy, that ability to reach out and to connect and have that much higher emotional intelligence and awareness to reach out and connect and be vulnerable. I really want to normalize this conversation for men because this is not comfortable for the majority of the masses of men out there.
I agree. That's why this is more important that we do this today.
Mm-hmm. And so my story was 2010. And it's going to have to go back even before that. And I'm just going to try to sum this up in about 2 minutes. Basically,
take your time.
Yeah,
take absolutely. Your time on it. I don't think there's a rush here. I think you should take your time.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate that space. My younger brother was 4 years younger than me. His name was Andrew. And where I was kind of the academic, all-star, good athlete, started working at a young age as well. I did a lot. I managed myself very well and grew a tremendous amount of independence at a very young age. Grew up with a single mother. Did the dance back and forth occasionally with my father. And my younger brother, he had a lot of challenges. Severe ADHD, learning disabilities, required a tremendous amount of attention, which is where a lot of my independence came from. And I was basically, my mother and I talk about this, how I was kind of the man of the house at age 6, 8 years old, right? Trying to figure it out, did all my homework, would just ask for like project materials essentially for like class projects or whatever. And I'd figure it out how to assemble it. And, she took care of my needs, like my basic needs. But for the most part, when it came to school and that structure and just figuring life out as I grew up, I was able to do it. It resulted in a tremendous amount of my success. All through the years, Andrew, my younger brother, just struggled immensely. Failing a lot of courses, dyslexia as well, right? So this natural school system that we're put into just did not fit the bill for him at all. He had a lot of challenges connecting socially. He was bullied quite significantly. My mother and I, we had a great deep conversation this past Sunday, Halloween, that marked the 12-year anniversary since we lost him. And, she shared that he was a very, very empathetic boy and young man. He would open his heart up to anybody around him, but didn't know how to have the boundaries to protect himself either, if that makes sense. So he would end up getting used a lot. When times were tough, people would come to him because he was there, he was available. And then when those people needed, for lack of a better term, a pissing post to make themselves feel better, they would use him for that.
What do you mean by that? They would
bully him, essentially, put him down. And I didn't even realize this. I had dribs and drabs of it, but it was actually just in this conversation with my mother this past week that we kind of talked at a deeper level about some of those pieces along the way that I had seen snippets of, but because of my level of awareness, my level of growth to this day, I can understand it a lot better now. Mm-hmm. And I can ask those deeper questions. And that's where, man, through this entire thing, this is 12 years. Learn that, this is going to be a lifelong journey for me. There's going to be continually new pieces that are going to show up for me. And I just hope that men are able to take away a few tools, a few questions, a few pieces, some insight, some knowledge that they don't need to wait that 12 years to get to this level. And so when I was early, maybe my second or third year of university, he got kicked out of the house. So he had just finished high school, I believe. And he gotten kicked out of the house. He was kind of hanging around with the wrong crowd, getting involved with the drugs, the alcohol. He was in not a great neighborhood, hanging out with some not great people. And he would call my mother for like a bailout, whatever that was, not a bailout of jail per se, but just a bailout. Like he was just in an emotionally bad spot.
Was it a cry for help? These reach outs?
For sure it was. And she was there for him. And it happened that eventually hit the spot. He hit the place where rehabilitation was on the table, where he was willing to do that. And he actually went away to a young men's. So he's in the range. So he probably would have been about 19 years old, just working the math backwards here. And he went to a young men's retreat camp, sober up, get some structure, get some discipline integrated into life, and then come out of that.
What do you think he was consuming alcohol and drugs for? What was driving this to get to this point where he's now seeking rehabilitation at 19, which says that there's likely a very high consumption of alcohol and drugs if he feels the need to do that at that age? Spend the money, spend the time.
It was to numb pain. And that pain, I strongly believe, was a lack of acceptance and a lack of belonging.
And that's really good to point out. I would say that's likely what it is at a deep level for many men who are abusing drugs and alcohol. It may start out as this is fun and it makes me feel more like myself, or it makes me feel like I can be free socially. I have lowered anxiety, so now I can express myself. But I think at the core, what you just said and what your brother was experiencing, if a man is listening to this now and he struggles or he feels like he may have an alcohol and drug issue or knows someone who does close to him, it's likely that right there, wanting to feel accepted and belonged, or a lack of genuine, authentic connection.
Yeah. And that was it too, Andrew, was like, he had been prescribed heavily with Ritalin. You know, these are in the mid to late 90s, 2000s, right? Where it's just like, oh, any sort of like that, they were just giving that stuff out.
Right.
Left, right, and center.
I remember. Yeah.
And I remember there being that period, mid to late high school, where he was starting to say a lot of those common things of like, I don't feel like myself on this. I don't like taking these any longer, because he'd been on it for, geez, almost a decade at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
At that age too, because your brain is really developing. And so it's being developed alongside with this drug.
I know. It's, you know, and this is where, this is like the piece that gets quite emotional for me and my mother as well, is that like, had all of this happened today, the amount of knowledge, the amount of acceptance, the understanding of mental health, of learning disability, of learning challenges, just different ways to learn, and stop trying to ram this entire system and make everybody conform to this one thing, like thou shalt fit this puzzle piece,
Right.
this structure. You know, that's the piece that gets really, that's painful for me.
The contrast here is that you excelled within that structure, and
Mm-hmm.
he was not at that level, but you did.
Totally.
So that was directly in front of him at all times. And
Yeah.
coming from, it's like we have the same genes here. I can relate to your younger brother in that, as my brother was the star 4.0. Everything that he did academically, like he only got one B in his entire life, all A's throughout everything, high school and college, everything. And even into his master's, and I struggled academically. I did not fit into this society's mold here of the academic success and these things and fitting within that. I relate with your brother in that. And it hurts to hear what happens next here in the story, because I feel that if he had more time to him, that he would have discovered and really found that he can create his own. He would have been successful in whatever he chose had he found his own. It wasn't going to be society's,
No.
as we can see, society's
No.
version of success. But there was, and I want to relate this to the audience, in that for a lot of people listening, they may feel like they're not fitting society's version of success, but there is a version of success that you can fit into. And this is a good, positive story for those listening, in that everyone has their gifts and strengths.
It's one of the most powerfully, deeply rooted pieces that I love working with the men in this program on.
Mm-hmm. Our
is
clients,
writing their own definition of success. Like that, there is a big piece of fire in me to help men find that.
And I knew that early when you were a client, but I did not know the driver. I didn't know, because you had a flame about you, but once I learned more about you, then I understood the driver of it. What was driving this? Why is he just doing everything that the program said? Why is he so on fire in the program? It is this, what you're talking about. What you just said, that was the fire to do this for yourself, and then to now turn around and help others within the program. Mm-hmm. We say our shirts here. I mean, if you're listening to this, we're both wearing the same shirt that says "Stay Grounded." And the way I view grounded is to live in alignment to your values and your vision, not Andrew's vision, not Pete's vision, not Pete's values, not my values, but yours. And so we help men uncover that and then live in alignment to that. That's where man will find his freedom and peace.
Mm-hmm. And the second piece to back that up, Andrew, is the community. That
yes,
feeling of belonging. And I love the growth of the community over the last 3 years. And I saw just the other day, I think it was earlier this week, a man reached out in the community with, like, very new to the program, going through a tough circumstance, and the number of comments, I think there were 22 comments within about 2 hours.
It's incredible.
There to support him.
It's incredible. And not just like there for you, got your back, like real genuine paragraphs of relating and supporting, and then getting on calls.
Mm-hmm.
It has grown. I have huge plans for 2023 on a whole new platform, as I'm seeing that a moment like that for a guy to get something like that, he may never get that in his actual life. That level of support instantly is not something that is available. Men don't even know it's available.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the community. Back to your brother going into a rehabilitation program.
Yeah, and I brought up that piece around community because, you know, in this week, right? Like after having that conversation with my mom on Sunday and then seeing that man reaching out for support on like the Tuesday or whatever, you know, just being in this season of grief and just looking at that and reflecting on that, it's like, son of a bitch, like if that had been there for my brother.
Yeah.
It was interesting, Andrew, just because, again, because of the social challenges that he faced, he would connect very well with an elderly population or a younger population. So he was serving as, you know, kind of like a big brother, if you will, or you know, kind of like a camp leader, something like that for very young kids. And then he ended up, after he came out of the rehabilitation center, he was working at an old folks home, at a long-term care facility, but really couldn't make that connection with people in his own age group very well.
What do you think is going on there?
I mean, only he would have the answers, right? But for me to look at it from the outside would be a lot of those learning disabilities. He was diagnosed with somewhere on the spectrum, likely Asperger's as well.
Mm-hmm.
So social connection is very difficult to be able to read body language. And yet he was so empathetic with those around him, didn't want to see anybody suffer, was always thinking about everyone else, that he didn't have the boundaries. So I can only imagine the amount of scarring that would have occurred in him continually putting on, of like being hurt over and over and over again, with giving himself out continuously for other people's well-being, but then them taking advantage of him, and the amount of pain that he was having to cover up. So my assumption, Andrew, is that in the latter stages, he was very guarded, very hesitant, and used those vices to numb that out, and use that. Think about that young man, age 19 to 20, 18 to 21 type thing, right? Yeah. Alcohol is a very big thing at that age, right? This is the opportunity to be able to let a lot of those guard down. You know, a lot of social activities are associated, right, with parties, with alcohol, right, with drugs.
Changing the state.
Mm-hmm. And so he got out of the rehabilitation center. I would have been 24. This would have been 2010. This would have been 2010. And I did not know this part, Andrew, until just this past Sunday. There was opportunity for follow-up on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis that he chose not to do. And I found this piece very fascinating. It's the mentality around that intensity versus the consistency, and the consistency wins all the time.
Explain that part.
I think of so many people out there, myself included, and then relating it to this instance, like there's that intensive rehab treatment for him. Or if you on your journey, or myself on my journey, if there's any piece of that, it's like, hey, I want to go and improve this. A lot of people want to go and tackle it in maybe a 30-day period and then go back to life as normal. But if there's not the consistency over time, it fades off really fast.
Yeah. You go back to homeostasis. You go back to your old and comfortable ways of being. The consistency of leaning towards your own values and leaning towards your own vision will eventually allow you to live in that new vision. Mm-hmm. But if it's not consistent, then it will always remain a distant, far away dream.
The perfect example of that, man, is like the New Year's resolution at the gym.
Perfect example.
You walk in there, you see somebody that you've never seen at the gym before.
Yeah.
and they're just like, they're throwing on the weights more than I'll bench.
Right. They're
Or
putting
squat, or
themselves up
whatever
for
it is.
injury. They're getting
And
ready
I'm just
for an
looking
injury.
at them like, you're not coming back tomorrow.
They got new gear. They got all the
Yeah.
new fashion.
Yeah. And it's like, you just got to put in the consistent repetitions over time. That's where the lasting change occurs. Because that really quick shot of intensity, that's a piece of motivation. It's a kindling that, yes, can absolutely serve its purpose, make a massive course correction, light the fire. But if you don't have that, if you don't consistently tend to that fire, it's going to go out.
Why do you think your brother didn't remain consistent?
A new sense of belonging there came in, where he really wanted to, from my understanding. So he started into a tree planting role where he was part of a team, right? But I don't think that he had the ability to see that the long-term future. He was staying off of the alcohol at the time, right? He was putting in the right repetitions. He was actually doing quite well with it. However, very evident that below the surface, still extremely fragile. I had just graduated university. I didn't have any, like, forestry, man. 2010, trying to find a forestry job in North America. Good luck. Right? Housing crash of 2008, when housing prices go down, there's nothing getting built, no lumber's getting sold, forestry
Okay,
companies.
now it makes sense. At first, I was shaking my head like, okay, now I get it. Yeah, 2008. Okay, yeah.
So I was just kind of like hanging out for a little bit, trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And it worked out the exact way that it was supposed to, because my grandmother, we were very close with my grandparents growing up. Very, very close. And my grandmother was an odd duck. Like, she did not fit the bill of, World War II era grandmothers. Like, she went against the grain. She marched to the sound of her own drum. So her and my brother connected very well. Very, very well. There were a couple of oddballs that just got each other. And just at graduation, I think I had just finished up my exams. She had been not doing so well, and she started degrading very quickly. Thankfully, I had the opportunity to go up and spend a couple of weeks with her. And she passed shortly after, just before I ended up moving out to the West Coast, probably around sometime in July of 2010, June or July of 2010. And the part that I wasn't aware of, because you got to think of where I was at the time. I'm just like branching out, trying to go out and establish my life in the world. Poor as hell. Trying to figure out a career and how to adult. So I didn't understand all of the nuances going on for Andrew, for my brother. And then in talking to my mom this past Sunday, she said that apparently he was coming back from the bush, got the news, and went straight back to the alcohol, where he had been staying off of it for several months leading into this. Mm-hmm. And this is where that consistency piece comes in, that had he had those supports, have been putting in those repetitions since getting out of the rehab, out of the treatment center, far more likely that there would have been something there to catch him. Mm-hmm. That he would have been, sure, he was putting in the right repetitions on the outside, but that says to me, still very fragile. And again, that devastated him, man. I can empathize with that. The closeness of the two of them, like she was the consistent piece for him. Not saying that my mother never, like, she did a hell of a job above and beyond, but you know how it is, right? Like, the relationship that you have with your grandparents, very different than what you have with your parents.
It can be. Yeah.
Yeah. And she had been that consistent piece of connection for him all through his entire life, and that was just lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. I totally get it. The pain that he must have been feeling.
The problem is that alcohol works short term. It will change your state and provide relief. The problem is that it's short term and there are long-term consequences. And I'm not here standing here on a soapbox acting like I've never delved into vices. I'd love to share on a different episode. But the alcohol journey for any man who is feeling depressed or just not accepted or not fully connected with those around him, and he feels like this is the outlet to feeling acceptance or to feeling connection or to feeling okay with yourself, it is a journey downhill. You are going downhill, and I think that in itself is a journey that many men listening don't address. Similar to this topic, the main topic here about loss.
Mm-hmm.
But the alcohol journey is associated with the loss because it's often the first thing that we would turn to, that many men, including myself, have turned to when you have loss, especially if it's unexpected loss. And it is a journey that will not get better if you continue to drink. You're not going to drink your way out of grief, out of a loss of a loved one. You're basically putting that journey on pause while you deteriorate your health.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the challenge with it is that it's so socially acceptable.
Yes.
Right? Like everything is surrounded around, you want to go get a drink after work. Oh, that's a really hard time. Oh, let's get a drink. Oh, this is a really good time. Let's get a drink. I mean, Jesus, man, the friggin' insanity of the pandemic of how much more normalized it became to like drinking at home. Oh my God.
Drinking by yourself. Yeah.
And it's just like, that's not being pushed by the alcohol companies. Like that's society making this stuff up, right? Like it's wild. It's wild. And
it is poison, and the effects of alcohol that we associate with feeling good is your body's response to the poison.
Mm-hmm.
That is what being drunk is. It is your body's response to the poison. We just so happen to like that response.
Mm-hmm.
But your body is basically sick and it's trying to get rid of the alcohol. And this process stimulates a lot of neurotransmitters that in the meantime of your body metabolizing the alcohol, your body's feeling good. We have found a poison that the process of getting rid of the poison feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so, just think about that. That is so dangerous, is that this poison makes you feel good. And the only way to feel good again is to consume more of the poison. And it is an endless cycle. I have been on this alcohol journey. And so it is a catch-22 if you are depressed. It's double the effect because you need relief.
Mm-hmm. And it's the realization, like you're talking with those neurotransmitters, with how the body is responding to it, and from just the logical, emotional side as well. Like you wake up the next morning and those problems that you were numbing out, they didn't get any better overnight. Good chance you just stacked something else on and made it worse.
Yeah, you may have made it worse. There are some things you may have sent or said or done that.
Yeah.
One thought here for the audience is if you look at many of your regrets or mistakes of things done or said, you may notice a theme that alcohol or drugs was associated with that major regret or mistake. Sober, you actually don't have a history of regrettable action.
My piece that I want to give to the audience here as well is that, like Andrew shared, like I shared, I'm about to get into this here in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
of like my journey with alcohol because of the grief. I'm going to get there in a second, but zero judgment, man.
Zero. No, I
Like
get it.
we get it.
I get it. Yeah. I'm right there.
I get it. I feel you. And believe me, like the lies, I've gone through all of the lies that you have, or you will, or you are telling yourself right now, listening to this. Got it under control. I could stop any time, blah, blah, blah. This is all up on the internet. Seek support, seek coaching. Like just walk this out for the next 10 years. Because I'll tell you, men, there's a beautiful, beautiful life on the other side of this. And again, a deeply rooted passion of why I do this work. I mean, shit, Andrew, you saw me come in at a pretty rough place.
Yeah. There was a dark presence, but it was inside a man trying to commit to this journey, trying to grow, trying to look and search for answers, for support.
And it came down to just saying, like, this isn't it. This is not it.
What is not
that
it?
Was
like your
that,
reality or what?
Yeah, my reality and how I was living, how I was showing up, what I was feeling, that was not it.
That's a turning point right there. That would be the wake up call out of the Matrix, or out of Groundhog Day, or out of when you're stuck in a routine, and those routines aren't even serving you. Like, we want the routines and habits to actually be benefiting you, but we get stuck in the routine, we get stuck in homeostasis, and then boom, it can go on for years or decades or all your life. But when you can say what you just said, that is a awakening moment. This is not it. There is no way that I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. This is not it. I need to embark on a journey. That is what it is. And there will be, as we've said, there will be the cave, the dark cave, which will test how committed you are to the journey.
Yeah. So going back to 2010, loss of my grandmother. Within, I think, about a month of that, I moved out to the West Coast to start a job in the private logging industry. So I didn't know the nuances of what was going on back home. And this is where things, Andrew, are going to get pretty real for me, and likely fairly emotional as well. And this is one of the pieces that I had a little bit of that anxiety coming into this, of some of that uncomfortableness. And it's just, you know, I when we were getting onto this, it's like, no, I'm just going to own it. This is what this is all about.
This is likely what the audience needs to hear as well. And this may be, even for yourself, a turning point.
Yeah. And it was interesting because it was September, October. And I remember, like, I had just been kind of a couple months into the job. Like, I was actually like a full-time job. I had done a lot of summer work with this company, so I knew the community. I knew a lot of the players. You know, I knew what the job was all about. But this here, I was working more with the actual loggers occasionally and stuff, and saw some of the young age, some of them that, you know, didn't necessarily finish high school or didn't do a post-secondary, but were getting out and doing some incredible work. And just the abundance of knowledge and tools and skills and learning opportunities that I gleaned from them that I would have never learned at any university, right? Like, just these really, really cool, you know, we're working cable logging systems, and, like, you know, how to, just everything from the mechanics to, you know, how they're working with everything out in the blocks and making these things happen with this, you know, coastal logging situation. And I was actually thinking, I could see Andrew fitting in here. I could see my brother, like, coming out. Like, we're just all a bunch of black sheep out here. A bunch of hillbillies that just love working in the bush.
The bush meaning the wild.
Yeah, the forest.
The forest. Okay.
Yeah. working in industrial cable logging systems for a forestry company.
Okay.
And always looking for help, or always looking for, you know, and in those logging situations, like I was working on the management planning engineering side for sure, but the actual loggers going out and actually executing the work on the ground, hard days work, not a tremendous amount of paperwork or all these things that our society tries to push us into, like with paperwork systems, you know, there's safety rules and regulations, absolutely. And I was thinking like, geez, this could be a really good fit for him. Like a lot of these guys, they would get along really well. And
I think what you're saying here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that I think my brother would have had community here more so than the job itself.
Yeah. And just thinking about his future as well, right? In terms of, I didn't know, I knew that he was working as this tree planter. He had done some work with the long-term care facility, but like, what was that long-term kind of growth? Was there, you know, and I saw a potential opportunity to offer up. And you got to think too here, man, and is who I was at the time and the kind of relationship that we had. And that was like, I was pretty hard on him. You know, we talked about that system that your older brother, that I excelled in.
Right. He did well, right, in society's version of success.
In society's version of success.
You know, same family, same upbringing. He's sleeping right next door to me. Like he has no advantages that I don't have yet. I am not able to do what he's doing. And there was definitely a chip on my shoulder of like, why am I not as good as my brother growing up?
For sure. And I remember, again, playing this weird role of being kind of that fatherly figure at the same time from a very young age, of trying to be that role model, but not understanding, not being able to empathize, of like really sometimes putting the pressure on him of like, why are you fucking up so much? That sucks. That's not helpful. So back to 2010, got the phone call from my mom that he had taken his life. And I'm going to hold off. I believe that there's a pocket of boundary here around the conversation between my mom and I. Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. I think we can understand the brevity of what that might be like.
Yeah. And I remember just going, it was on the Saturday morning, I believe it was, that I received that phone call. And I remember just going into the shower. That was it. Like I walked into the shower and started showering.
Were you bawling? This was shock to you, obviously.
Shock.
This is obviously shock.
Shock. And then it hit me in the shower. Like
okay.
Looking back on it, you know, it's just there's no logical side behind this at all. Like I don't even think that I really had control of my actions, and I just went and was like, I need to shower. So I went into the shower, and then that's where I broke down.
Maybe the shower here represented safe, like space. A lot of people in the shower, there's a level of comfort. It's closed, small room.
When I shared this with my partner just recently, she said the same thing. That it's a place of privacy where you can be vulnerable.
Yeah, privacy. That's the word. That's the word I was looking for. There's a level of privacy.
And I remember just kneeling down on one knee, and I don't know how long I was there for. And then for the remainder of the weekend, I was just like zombied. Just zombie. Didn't know what to do. I think I just sat down and basically played Halo. Didn't know what to do with myself. Didn't know who to talk to. Thankfully, my mentor, my really good friend, work colleague, he actually had that conversation with my boss for me, which was, at the time, I don't think I recognized how grateful I was for that, of like not being able to function, and that to take that piece off of me of like having to go in and have that conversation with my boss. Incredibly grateful for that. And went back home for a couple of weeks. All of my good friends from university showed up. We're all there for support. It was really incredible to see so many of them. They were so good. And I didn't know how to process it, man. The ceremony was at the church, going back to the funeral home. My father, who I hadn't seen in 8 years, showed up.
That's a part of the story that we haven't heard any of. Where was his father during this time of struggle for, with your brother? Because it seems like you're putting a lot of weight on yourself here as well. It seems here that would make sense. Like you're the older brother, and your younger brother has done something here. And as an older brother, of feeling like this sort of mentor type role, but there is also a father here. It sounds like he's not present in because you're saying 8 years for yourself, but is that basically the same with your brother?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. There is a piece here that was inserted into the story that I think reveals a little bit more about your life and your brother's struggle as well.
Mm-hmm.
We'll continue. Your father's here.
That we'll set that aside for now, but that piece there of him showing up and trying to engage with me just triggered so much anger and rage. Of like, here I am trying to figure out what the hell just happened, and then this person shows up.
This person
that should have been playing this role and hasn't been showing up. Like, you can imagine the anger that I had, the amount of like blame, resentment, compounded on top of everything else that I'm feeling.
You're 24 at this time.
24. Remember, I want to make this really, really clear right here, right now. I can name these emotions now, even 3 or 4 years ago, let alone 12 years ago, couldn't. I probably could have identified anger. I couldn't identify resentment, shame, guilt, sadness. Yeah, we'll get into the shame here in a moment, because that's a powerful one that led to, like we mentioned, that alcohol journey.
They're related.
For sure. For sure. So I was just absolutely irate. Just a muddle up of what's going on for me. And so I got into the vehicle and I went for a drive, like a long drive into like back roads, rural New Brunswick. I can't even remember. I think, anyways, geographically, it doesn't matter, but just went for a long drive, and just to let that anger come off. And then it was that deep, deep sadness underneath. Cried myself dry, but wasn't willing to allow anyone to see that, right? Wasn't willing to share that with anybody for some of those reasons that we talked about right at the start. Fear of appearing weak. Ridiculous for me to look at that right now. Yeah, not who I was at the time.
You don't have it figured out. You don't want to reveal that.
Yeah.
Very common. Not for 24-year-olds, for
No.
for just men.
Yeah. And so what took over, what started consuming after that? You know, I was home for a couple weeks, visiting with friends, never really sought any support, never truly talked about it either. Was dismissive of it. Even when my mother tried to talk to me or my stepfather tried to talk to me about it, I dismissed it. Wasn't really letting anything in with friends. Just my sole focus was getting back to feeling good as quickly as possible. Sound about right?
Sounds exactly right.
Yeah. Did not give myself, didn't find the resources, didn't talk about it because it hurt, because I didn't understand. And so going back, heading back out west to continue my job, continue my work, it was, don't get me wrong, it was good. There's one piece of regret here, or a missed opportunity, let's call it that. Had I gained some insight, some resources, some coaching, some counseling, a blend of both, my goodness, my healing journey could have been accelerated, because I was working in the woods a lot and quite often by myself.
Yeah. You're isolated.
I'm isolated.
Emotionally and physically.
Physically, yeah. And so nothing there to help pull me out. I'm just stewing on the same patterns, these same stories, these same what ifs. I would say that those what ifs, Andrew, or I should have, were my detriment. That's what drove me into a dark place. Looking back, and this is where the shame starts stacking on. Looking back at all those times that I was hard on him. The building hatred, for lack of a better word, resentment for that person that should have been that fatherly figure for him and not showing up.
Wait, can you say that part again? You not being the father figure? Is that?
No, sorry, for my actual biological father not showing up. Yeah,
Okay.
So you got this piece compounding in as well.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. That I understand that part. I thought you were taking the role of father for your brother. That is not the case here.
That's another piece as well. Separate and aside from that is like, what could I have done differently?
Mm-hmm. Right.
How could I have been a better role model? How could I have been there for him, supported him more? Like the times that my mother was going over to help him in some of those dark times, like myself actually saying no because I was going to university at the time. Maybe I had exams, classes, whatever the next day, and I would tell her no. Like I had drawn those boundaries.
I see. You're young as hell at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You yourself at this time, and even today, and just like myself, you're figuring it out. Like you don't have all the answers. I could see how there would be a great deal of pressure on you and pain and anguish based upon what happened. But we have to look at, you were a good role model because you were only doing what you thought was best.
Yeah.
At the time, you only were able to know and do what you thought was best. What was your belief at that time about what happened?
That I didn't do enough. That was my belief through and through. That I wasn't there for him enough. I wasn't supportive enough. That I didn't show up well enough for him, that I should have seen this coming. Right?
Yeah.
Looking at it now, I can easily say that no, like exactly like you just said, I can look and talk to that 20 to 26-year-old, 24-year-old version of myself that way. In the moment, being in it.
Yeah, of
being
course.
out in the woods, stewing on it.
What would you say to Pete at 25?
You did everything that you could with the tools that you knew how to use. There's more to it than this. Find the help, find the resources that you need to be able to process this, because you are going to be able to turn this into something powerful in your life if you show up as a student and if you get vulnerable and real with yourself about what's going on.
I would say that that is the truth. That is not a belief to make yourself feel better. That is
No,
the truth.
no,
That is the belief. We can see where this goes. If, or because you lived in that false belief, it was detrimental to your growth. It was a false belief that you were running on a.
yeah.
And I think applying this to the audience, people who have had loss or are currently going through that, what is the belief that you have about that loss? Perhaps there is a false belief, likely is, and that belief is at the root of your suffering. I had a similar belief around my father passed away unexpectedly. He was getting sick, but he had the doctors. When I went to I was in charge of it, like legally, and I would have the conversations with the doctor, and they said 10, 12 years longer. He would eventually pass in within that year.
Mm,
The belief that I had was I was building my business. I was going through my own challenges. I had gone through a breakup. I was going through health challenges. But the belief was that I am a problem solver. Why didn't I solve the problem for my dad's health? I felt that I have so much capacity that I could have done so much more to solve the problem.
mm,
I just sort of listened and went along with the flow of the health system, the veterans health system, which obviously is, you know, an underfunded system, that I should have taken him out of that, that I should have sought the best doctors who could solve this problem, that I should have been reaching out to experts, that I should have been become this expert on his own health, which is his kidney. And that was the belief that I carried, which if you listen to that, it's like, how could you? I was going to become a doctor, basically. That's what I was like. Why didn't you basically learn more than the doctors?
yeah.
And that belief created immense depression and suffering and alcoholism.
Thank you for sharing that, man. And
Mhm.
see a pattern very common between what you just shared there and my story of the conversations that I was having with myself. And I'm not sure how this will land. I understand that each person's journey is going to be slightly different, but that I should have
Mm.
XYZ, I should have
Yes,
XYZ, I should have,
I
I should
should
have, I
have.
should have, I should have. That's what did that do for you going down that? What was your experience going down all of those should haves in terms of like what was starting to build up inside of you when you were doing that?
I'm a failure. I'm a
Mm,
failure of a son. I was responsible and I failed. And someone I loved died because of my failure, which is a horrible belief. I solve problems and I think I'm good at it, but I was not able to solve the problem of my dad's health, which is not something I could have solved.
no,
He was seeing kidney doctors. He was seeing the people who had the experience, decades and decades, 30 plus years of being a doctor specializing in this health ailment, renal disease. So it was a false belief that would create unnecessary suffering and prolong a journey. And that's why I stopped podcasting. There's a gap in these podcasts, and there's a gap in my career where I had a hiatus. I was masking the pain. I wasn't fit for service.
thanks for sharing that, man. And it's good for you for doing that. We're taking a step away.
That's interesting you say it that way. And I appreciate that. It's interesting that you view it that way. And I like that.
Because for me, like I went ultra focused on my work.
So the opposite here.
Mm-hmm. That's where it's very interesting how we cope differently.
Yeah. I clocked out.
I clocked in.
Yeah. And
So
they're both ways of masking the issue.
Totally.
It's not like one is better than the other. Like, because I didn't reveal what I was doing when I clocked out, but
yeah. And I think that's the power of this, Andrew. And I think that is a beautiful lesson exposing itself right here for you and I. Like it's right, like I'm learning right here, and
it is active.
And for the audience as well, is that we're all going to deal with this differently.
Yes.
Right? Like my version of myself back, could you imagine 24-year-old Andrew Ferebee and 24-year-old Pete showing up and you're like, oh, I'm going to clock out. And I'm like, no, man, like you clock in at this point. Like what are you doing with your life? Right. And it's just recognizing that you'd be on the polar opposite. Like, no, take a break. Like you need to figure things out. No, you got to work really hard. Bury that stuff down. Make it go away.
I fired everyone.
Yeah.
I fired everyone. I had a team and I had success.
Really clocked out.
Yeah. I took down the whole thing. I didn't need to. It was working.
That adds a way different context saying clocking out. I thought it meant that you just like stepped out of the business, but you like shut the doors.
I fired everyone, man. And I didn't need to. There was a breakup at this time. I had lost a close friend in a helicopter crash. And then 2 weeks later, my father unexpectedly passed away. So there's 3 losses in a 30-day period that were all people that I spent time with were all gone in 30 days. So I shut everything down. And I was like, I don't know what's happening in my life right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's I think the piece there, Andrew, for the awareness for everybody listening. I mean, so powerful to hear your side. Because I mean, us sitting here today looking at this, probably the audience looking at it, it seems completely ridiculous. Burying yourself in your work would seem completely ridiculous. But that's what people need to recognize, is that everyone's going to deal with it in a different way. It might not seem logical or rational. So whether you as an individual are undergoing this right now, whether it's something that you foresee coming or whether you don't, rational thought is not a part of it. And if you're supporting somebody going through it, going through grief, integrating grief into their life, rational thought, and I think it really comes back, man, to that piece that you started off with about the ability to just hold that space, that uncomfortable space, because how many of us will dodge that conversation? You want to go get a beer? You want to go get a drink?
Yeah, snort lines. And it all, anything to change the state will be, or what I was susceptible to, because the current state was, reality had been shattered. The life I would live from that point forward these people were gone. And it was my first experience of loss. And it all happened, a lot happened in a 1 month period. I don't even know that I believed it. I would always look at my phone because my dad would call me, and I would think he was just going to call me. The phone would ring and I'd be like, I think he's just going to call me. And same with my friend. He would always text me funny things, and there was no call. It took a while to accept reality. I thought he would just show up. I never saw the situation of either of these people. I didn't go to this to the scene,
Mm.
and I didn't. The the ceremony wasn't. There wasn't a casket, and so
This was for your friend.
and my dad, my
Okay.
friend, he was um, incinerated in the crash, and yeah, and then for my dad, he passed away. The doctor said peacefully, but then I never went to the house. They would said they'll wait for me, the police, and I just didn't want to see him like that. And I didn't even believe the police officer because I called to do a wellness check, and my dad's phone would usually just die. And so it was very common for me just to call and do a wellness check. And then they would go knock on his door, and then they would say, "Hey, your son's trying to call you. He said you should charge your phone." And then my dad would be like, "Oh, my phone died." And then I had done that numerous times. That was kind of like a common thing. And it was very casual for me to call the police and do a wellness check. And this would be a real wellness check. And
Yeah.
he called back, and I remember like being on my computer just kind of listening to music. And he would call, and he would just be like, "Is this Andrew Ferebee?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he had a different tone this time, and he's like, "Your father is no longer with us." And that was it. He just held the space. He didn't just hang up. And I was like, "Are you sure?" And I started trying to boss them around. And I was like, "Well, do your job. Take him to the hospital. Like, what's the technology here? What's the solution? Get the experts. What are you talking to me for? Send them to the ER. Call a helicopter." And he just sat there and listened to me. He didn't say a word.
Wow.
I felt that he had done this. He was an older man, older police officer, and I had felt that he had done this many times and knew my reaction was going to be something like that. And I was yelling at him, trying to tell him to do his job, telling him that I'm going to call another police officer to do his job. You're not doing your job. And he was like, "Andrew, I'm here looking at your father, and he is not with us." And then I would fall. I would fall to the floor. And I didn't know that I was capable of crying and bawling in the way that I did. And then I never went. They said they'll wait for me, and I didn't know why I would go. I didn't want to see what it looked like. He made it seem as though he had been passed away for quite some time. He did let me know that in these situations, not everyone wants to be here. It's perfectly normal. And then the conversation ended, and this police officer was so good with me. And I tried to get in contact with this guy for like weeks after, just to thank him. But I was never able to get in contact with him because I just felt like he held the space for what was a crisis. And he was very warm and present, and he showed up really well. And so hats off to police officers who have to deal with that, and emergency responders who have to deal with those kind of situations, and do it with that level of care and professionalism.
Feel you, man.
Just reliving it.
Yeah.
And then the false belief would then start right there. Almost inflicting emotional suicide onto myself for many years. It would take some time before I would not, like we shared, I would not have been able to share what I just shared before. And you shared something earlier about how, I'm going to be learning about this situation for the rest of my life. I would definitely agree with that. That it is a journey that is always unfolding.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that, man. And I know that you were reliving it there because I could really feel you in it. And felt like I was living it right there beside you.
Yeah.
I think there's a really powerful lesson right here in the way that both of you and I shared and held that space. That's an example, I believe. Not saying that this is perfect by any means, and it's going to need to fit to the context of the relationship of who you're having the conversation with. Absolutely. So don't use this as the perfect prescriptive how-to by any means. There is no how-to in this process. That's, I think, one of the major points. However, even during your conversation, and I know that likely during my conversation, my share, there's those pieces of you that wants to pipe in and say, oh, no, that's not, like, give advice or whatever it is. And I found myself even during your share wanting to say, oh, no, man, like, that's totally reasonable. And it's just not my place to say anything. It's just to sit here and listen and to not invalidate what you felt during that experience.
Right.
Because that state that you were getting into, that emotional level that you were reaching into, that level of vulnerability, the emotional level that I was able to connect with you and actually feel, like, see you in that moment, be there alongside you for that very brief snapshot and feel that. I could have pulled all that away by trying to jump in and interject, and vice versa.
That police officer was taking my shit. I was throwing shit at him, and he could have been a real asshole.
Yeah.
To me, and it would have amplified the situation. But he did not at all. He was like some sort of angel in a way of how he was able to deliver this and hold the space and allow for me to reach a point where I would then accept what's happened. And then for him to say, I'm going to get back to finishing, or not finishing, but I'm going to get back to the job here. I have work to do, meaning what's going to happen with my father. Not like, hey, I have another call to go to. There was a lot of people there that had to show up. Coroner, the sheriff, the people who would then carry him away. And this space is so important, I think, in times of any emotional struggle for anyone. And I think what the police officer did, because he could have been like, are you trying to tell me how to do my job? He could have gone down that path. And how you've held space, how I've held space, I think this applies really well just in any emotional struggle or emotional situation. I think this is a missing component or an underutilized component in man's toolbox
Yeah.
of relating and connecting with others. And I think this would greatly apply in romantic relationship. You said the key word invalidation, which is often what we as men, we as problem solvers, we as solution oriented men are going to lead with as our way, as a way of adding value. But it may not be received as value yet.
Super powerful, man. And you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's always a work in progress.
It is.
Really is. Like it really, really truly is. And especially I find myself in struggling with that in intimate relationship quite often because of the line of work that we're in, the roles that I've served, like what my default state is. I remember going back to that 6-8-year-old independence. Like there's problems, I solve them.
Right.
And I heard it. I can see like it's so telling just listening to your story, just holding that space there of hearing that logical side of your brain trying to go into that problem solving. That's what led to the what ifs or I should haves.
Yes.
That led to you unloading on that police officer of like, do your job. Here's the problem. Here's all the solutions. Look, I'm giving them to you. Go and do them.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really great place to lead into for myself. And I'm sure that this is going to, I see the pattern here with yourself as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing your side of it. But moving back into the workforce for myself, not understanding, having this like independence, doing the journey alone, not wanting to appear weak, and trying to problem solve my way out of this. And where that led to, because of my very limited lack of tools in the box, my very limited view, my very narrow view, it was to bury myself in my work. And I excelled very well there. But I couldn't figure out the underlying pain or have the vulnerability, the honesty, the ego getting in the way to reach out for the support that I needed to actually process things. Because I was convinced that up until this point, I'd always figured out a solution. I was going to figure this one out too. I was just going to have a little bit more alcohol, a little bit more video games, just to numb the pain for a little bit longer. It was still too fresh. But that's the lie I told myself. I will figure this out. I will find the solution to this.
I can relate with you in that one more drink, video games longer. In a moment of deep crisis, you almost feel entitled to the vices. I am going through a very difficult situation. Therefore, I'm allowed to do this. And that is a dangerous, slippery slope in so many ways. And I'm not standing here as someone who has dealt with grief perfectly. I'm speaking from my own personal experience, having known the dangers of vices. Still, the crises overrode my own beliefs and logic. And I allowed myself and gave myself permission to engage in vices, to navigate this situation. But I wasn't navigating anything. I was hiding.
Yeah, I get it, man. How long did that last for, Andrew?
All of 2019. And then that would take us into the pandemic. And I think then I would take a mindset similar to yours, where I would work. And that's what I did. And if you can think back to the last episode, I worked. You can almost see how these things fit together.
Do.
of how I would work 18-hour days, and I would have a fire in me I wanted to rebuild what I had tore down, but I wanted to do it in a new way. I had learned a lot about myself, about my values. I had many years of experience in this coaching, personal development, online courses, podcasting, books. I had a lot of experience already in that space. I went into a hiatus, and then I wanted to come back, and I wanted to do it better than I ever had, in a way where I could feel redeemed, as well as I felt like I had been in a cave.
Mm.
I had dealt with some crises, and I felt, I wouldn't say fully healed at that point, but I felt ready to come back and to go away with vices and commit. The vices didn't work, basically. And so then I would turn to wanting to rebuild something that I had torn down, and I wanted to do it bigger and better, but with the lessons that I had learned over the last, at that point, like 7 years or so of being in this space, or 6 years. And I wanted to bring together almost everything that I had learned. I had really brought together a lot of what would be a really effective program for men. And I wanted to, of course, help men, impact men. But I thought I had learned a lot, and I was ready to come back. And I'll be honest, there was ego playing into that. And I always feel like when there's loss, that if I can make something positive happen because of this loss, X happened. It opened up X. And that's ego. I'm not saying this is the health. I think there's going to be a benefit to that. I think, because then you can look back and it's like, hey, like, because of that, I built this. But, in the moment, though, there's a good portion of ego that is driving these 18-hour days. But then the pandemic would hit, and it was like a perfect storm for me to sit down and work. I was going from drinking a lot by myself, or anytime I can get an excuse to go to a party, it was really an excuse for me to drink excessively.
Yeah.
And it gave me an excuse to engage in vices. It's like, oh, well, no, I'm partying, I'm socializing, I'm meeting people, I'm meeting girls, but I was really just drowning myself in alcohol and other vices. And then when the pandemic hit, I would really focus, and I was, for the most part, very sober and very focused and very healthy during the pandemic. And I would build Project Grounded Man. That was the culmination of what I had learned and what I had felt after coaching and working with so many men was going to be a really effective solution for men. And then I reached back out to the team that I had fired or let go of. Some of them came back, and I basically just called them and told them what happened. And several of those people would come back right away. They would quit what they were doing. And I told them what I'm building again and what happened to me. And some of them like quit their jobs within days and would come back and help build this. And that would be sort of the early stages of Project Grounded Man. You would then come in as a client, not too long after I had the course. I don't think it was done when you joined, right?
No, I think that I was pretty hot on your heels to get the content out for me to continue my journey.
Yeah. So, and then you would come in as a client while I'm wanting to redeem myself and wanting to put something together that would, this story would then, connect here. And then if you were to listen to the other episode, you would see that I accomplished the goal. And then I go back. The reason why I'm sharing this is because you're saying how long did the vices last for, but it's interesting. I'm still putting the pieces together, but as soon as I finish or felt that this goal was complete, the vices came right back.
Mhm.
They came back in a different form. I wasn't in isolation. I wasn't doing vices in isolation. There's an earlier episode about that, about some of my vices and distractions that you guys listening could go and check out. But we did an episode on that, and so now we kind of just did like the prequel right now that would lead to that. But when you're asking this question, I would say that I've had the longest sprints of sobriety recently. It's difficult. It was a different kind of vice, but I still think though that it was related to that extremely, what for me was extremely traumatic in that 1 month period where every week was like the worst week of my life, and they would stack. And it was, I believe that's what trauma is when something happens to you that is too great to handle, to bear, like at once, and your body goes into shock and it releases all this, and you go into this. So when I'm sharing this of like, hey, from personal experience, the vices, it is a mask of your reality. Like you're not living in reality when you're going through vices. And so I want to be clear too that vices take many forms. That it's we think of all the alcohol, the drugs, the tobacco, the video games. There's other kinds of vices, like work may be a vice, porn,
Very common one for men.
very common one. And that one is really interesting because you look good on,
Mhm.
externally. And so if you look good externally, then it encourages you to keep going. Whereas if you're an alcoholic, like it's quite clear that there's a problem. You're not looking good, you're not doing that well. But I'm definitely someone who can be very functional and engage in vices. I can still
Totally.
crush it during the day and at night engage. It was all ongoing, but it was masked because I was having success. And looking back, I can see that the false beliefs around the losses of these people would amplify the vices and distractions for much longer than I believe necessary. But everyone's going to have their journey with that. I would love to say that, after losing my father, that I could just jump straight into personal development and do this with absolute finesse of being someone who's so heavily engaged in personal development. But it would take some time before I could come back to my values and vision, which is to me the whole point of this like stay grounded motto, is that the alignment of values and vision will bring about your success, your freedom, your happiness and peace. So it's been, that would be a journey. And then within that journey, there's many other ones that would occur. But I think that journey was so powerful that it was like infecting other journeys for the listeners to hear the story that Pete and I are sharing, our journeys, and reflect in on how this is showing up for you and how you might relate to some of this. I think it opens up possibilities of what might be possible here if I'm living a life of distraction or if I'm living a life in alignment to my values and vision, and what false beliefs may be a part of that or driving that, what traumas in the past may have created those false beliefs. I feel good about sharing, and that pain in the belly and in the chest about that I would carry physically and emotionally, that I'd carry into my conversations, into my connections, into my love life. I feel though that pain has been reduced around my father's specific situation, around just that period of it was a season of loss. So now that we're having this conversation, like I'm even questioning myself, like, am I still driven by this, or have I grown from this and I am living in alignment? Or is the ego a part of this? But I would very much love to say that I have grown significantly and that I am always making progress towards a more aligned life that I want, and that I am progressing each day, month, and quarter. So I think, like you said, like, you'll always be learning from that experience. And when you said that, I was like, I agree. Like, new things will always come up, and new lessons will always arrive on the journey of experiencing these types of losses. Because what do you think would have happened to you if you didn't have that moment where you said, this is not it? Where would you be?
I was, to be honest and very frank and blunt with you, I was probably about 2 weeks away from seeing that the ending of my life would have ended the pain. That was my wake up. Was that, did I have suicidal ideation in that very moment? No, but I could see that it wasn't far around the corner. That's the level of pain I was in.
Mm-hmm.
Of doing exactly that, Andrew, of not talking about it, of carrying around the incredible amount of shame that you and I could sit here today and say, oh, there was no need for that, but it was real for me, and carried that for 8-9 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Of that, exactly that. I should have. The one that still does come back for me when I do think of my brother, and when I do think of Andrew, and the incredible impact. This is where a big piece of that fire comes from, Andrew, is that thinking of him in that moment, making that choice, and however it worked out, that this hits me every time that I think of this, very painfully, of like, was there a snapshot in this moment that he was like, I've made a mistake. I don't want this. And this is a huge driver for me, because I don't want anyone to ever experience that. I think you said it in the program, or maybe it was in one of your books, and it really resonated with me, man. It was actually what it must have been in your book, of what attracted me to you, to the program, is that a lot of men see suicide, or the ending of their life, as the ending of the pain. And all that is the absence of being able to live.
I certainly can relate with that idea of like, I'm not too far from having those kind of thoughts. Mm-hmm. And then I would think like a snapshot of like people who love me, and I'm, oh my God, like it would transfer to them. Like whatever pain I was feeling,
yeah,
it would transfer to them. And then I would just not be there to, I'm just like, here, you're going to take this.
And this is where, man, like I know the impact that we're having. I've seen it. And those are some of the most fulfilling moments for me, seeing guys coming in really tough places. And it's a huge moving piece for me, seeing them get into the ring, put in the work, growing out of those levels of pain. Not saying that everybody by any means is in that dark place, but they see that if they continue to walk that path for maybe 10 years, or basically that just this is not it.
Yes.
And they're ready to step up and do something, right?
That
and
right
then
there.
just knowing that right there. And then knowing that they're going to be able to have that impact on their sphere of influence. And then that sphere of influence, like this is something bigger than you or I sitting here. And I can't believe, man, you sharing your story of how things lined up and coming out of that in 2019. Like I said, I thought it was really uncanny that your name was Andrew, same name as my younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
And the timing of like you basically launching, I think you were just promoting in late 2019.
That sounds right.
And I signed up to like Christmas break 2019 was when I recognized that I needed help. I had gone to that really dark place on my own. October 2018, I focused on my physical, what I thought was my health, what was only my physical fitness. And then by Christmas break 2019, I recognized like this still wasn't it. And that was when I made the reach out. Somewhere in between Christmas and New Year's 2019. And then I joined in mid-January.
Yeah, that sounds right. All that timeline sounds right. You can see how these stories can intersect based upon and likely this is your story, but this is also likely, if we were to look at all of the clients, there's likely a story that drew them to this work, that connected them to the message.
Yeah, and I think to bring things really back to that focus on the grief, took me a long time to get to this point, to be able to have this conversation that you and I are having right here and in a public audience for me.
Yeah. 12 years.
Because I was brand new in my position, working with the logging industry when it happened. So I never talked about it. So the few people that knew, they knew, but any new introductions or anything, I never really talked about my brother. I never talked about Andrew. And then when I moved up to the Yukon here in 2015, I was actually to the point when people would ask me, do you have any siblings? I was giving a half-assed truth. I would say no. And wouldn't, like, these were with some of my hunting partners, some of my like friends that I had good connections with. Wasn't even at the level that I could share that truth. Like, so these are some of those pieces of like a continue to compound that guilt, that shame. And I think subconsciously consciously, I knew that like, if I just don't talk about this, it doesn't hurt. I don't need to have that uncomfortable conversation. And you can just see how every time that comes up, like you can imagine like that little piece of anxiety or that little piece inside of me that wants to talk about it, but that ego getting in the way, like just stuff that down. It'll go away. Have another beer, right? And then getting to the point, even just in the past few years, to be able to talk about him, name him, recognize that it's okay. There's power to be brought out of this. You know, one of the deepest conversations with my mother this past weekend, and still on this journey, and what an honor it is to be here and hopefully impact somebody, to be able to hold space or request that space of somebody that they trust in their life. Be able to open up and share of of what's going on for them, to just share the story. Because I can tell you, man, that being able to sit here with you and talk about this, like, I feel better about it. Not that I was coming in from a place of hurt or pain or anything like that, but it's an uncomfortable conversation.
Definitely. In many ways, healing. And I hope also that the audience who has been listening to this at this point, which has been quite some time in duration, that it has been healing for you, opening up new doors, ways of looking at things. This isn't by any means about bringing you down, but opening you up to the levels of growth that can exist because of these crises or opportunities. And because what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Even if you're like, that's bullshit. You don't understand my situation. You didn't go through what I went through. My situation's different. And you're right. It is different. And I don't know what's going on. But the alternative of hiding, or the distractions and the vices, or just simply just not addressing and allowing that to exist or drive you in directions that aren't in alignment, I just feel like that alternative, it's like, I feel the best thing we can do in times of crises is to grow. And I think the antidote to suffering and trauma is growth. And if you don't believe that, let me know what the antidote is. Mm-hmm. I'm open. I'm all ears. I'm not here to, if you have found a better way, I'm all ears. But I have found that growth has been a tremendous response to these types of crises, or any types of crises, or just really effed up situations that have happened to you. And perhaps you are in that situation, and you can now have the foresight to respond appropriately and reduce the hiding and to show up. And I think there's going to be some men who listen to this who are going to wake up.
I do too, man. It's a tremendous honor to be able to have this conversation, because I don't think enough people are having it. And I don't think that I'm so grateful for how this has all unfolded, that you and I are having this conversation now with the audience that you have, because it is the perfect audience that needs to hear it. It really is. And you bring up some beautiful points there, like those, you don't understand my situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What a beautiful excuse to hide behind.
It's great.
If you don't get out there and talk about it, nobody's going to understand. And nobody is going to ever fully understand exactly everything that you're feeling. It's a very unique experience to you. But you're cutting off all of the ability for connection, for empathy, for healing, for growth by trying to do it by yourself. Because I can tell you, man, I feel a hell of a lot more connected to you having this conversation. I feel a hell of a lot more connected when men in the community, in the coaching calls, step up and share that. I am not there to, but like trying to ram down, like, oh, you've got to stick to your goals, go with this. No. And that's what I want to leave the audience with here today. Coming from somebody that was in that place for 9 years. Save yourself that time and pain.
For those that are feeling emotionally moved, as we're coming to a conclusion here, it may make sense for you to reach out to a friend or family member and just connect about what's going on with you. Not that anything's wrong with you, but that it's just the reality of your life and where you're at. And if you're emotionally moved and you're sort of not sure what to do next, reach out to a close friend, reach out to a close family member and open up. There's probably something you're holding back, and it can be a great start to a journey of sharing what's real for you. Maybe it's even your own partner, just sharing what's real. Maybe you're hiding something from your own partner, like just sharing what's real. So that's my challenge for you. Of course, I think for those that are interested in the work Pete and I do, I think you know where to go at this point, kfmcoach.com. But really, I think just reach out and open up and be real more. It'll feel like you just had a large bowel movement. You'll be like, I feel so much lighter.
Yeah. The amount of tension,
an emotional release, if you will. Yeah, we've had a really moving episode here. I do think that there are going to be a group of men who made it to this point who may not live the same moving forward. They may wake up and start showing up to life in a new way.
I do too. That was the entire intention behind this. Have the conversation, share it with a friend, with a buddy, with a partner, whomever, and use this conversation and mine and Andrew's dialogue here as a vessel, as a template to open up a deeper conversation. And let's normalize this.
What?
Just the conversation around grief, of being able to discuss it, of being able to hold that uncomfortable space. How much better of a world would this be with leaders doing that, colleagues doing that, friends, family doing that for one another, being able to hold the space for one another and not try to skip over or feel like you need to do anything if you're supporting or know of somebody going through grief, integrating grief into their life. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing to solve. Just hold the space and allow them to talk and ask them what they need.
Yeah, good point. It might not be for you. You might be doing this for the other person as well, that you know.
Yeah. I want to leave it with one piece. My mother is all about quotes, and usually they don't resonate with me because we've got very different perspectives on quotes and where we're heading with our lives. And I know she said this one multiple times before, but this last weekend, like it all of a sudden, I think just because of the depth of our conversation, like the growth that I've had in my emotional well-being and capacity, it really hit home. And it's where there is deep grief, there is deep love. So Andrew, we started this episode off with you saying, like, these are the laws of nature. This is going to happen, whether expected or unexpected. We are all going to deal with this. We are all going to have this show up in our lives.
Right.
It's that double-edged sword. The stronger that love for whomever you lose,
the
stronger that grief is. It's expected. It's okay. Because I would be damn concerned if you say that you love somebody and you love them deeply and you lose them and there's no response. There is no grief.
Yeah.
I think that it's the equal and opposite response. And I think that's why that quote resonated so deeply, really impacted.
I think that's the cut.
Yeah.
I think that's it.